Let me tell you something absolutely nuts that just happened to me. A woman from the HOA, let's call her a Karen, actually called the police on me and tried to slap me with a $2,000 fine. Why? Because I was hunting on my own land. $2,000. Just like that. But here's what she didn't realize. Not the kind of person you can push around. My background. Let's just say I'm more prepared than she ever imagined. And the way this whole mess ended, man, I still laugh. About it, you'll be cheering by the time this story's over. And hey, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because this is going to be one unforgettable ride. That morning should have tipped me off. It was almost too peaceful. A crisp October breeze drifted through the trees, and I was out on my back porch sipping a glass of fresh orange juice. Deer wandered across my backyard like they owned the place. Now, living next to a forest preserve, that's not unusual. But that morning, it felt different. Like the world had hit pause. The air was still calm, that kind of rare quiet that makes you think, maybe just maybe you're about to have a perfect day. But looking back now, I should have known it was the calm before the storm. My name's Eric Johnson. I'm 32, and I have been living out here for 3 years now. The house isn't anything fancy, but it sits on 5 acres, exactly what I was looking for when I moved here. Space, freedom, privacy, the chance to live life on my terms without bothering a soul. That's all I wanted. The house is tucked away at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac surrounded by tall oak trees that block out the world. I picked this place because it felt like my own little refuge space where I could escape the noise and just breathe. Now here's the thing, I'm a serious hunter. Always have been. I'm not out there carelessly shooting at anything that moves. I'm precise, careful. I take it seriously. That morning I checked over my rifle one last time, made sure the scope was perfectly zeroed, and headed out toward the preserve. About an hour into tracking, I spotted a deer moving through a clearing. The spot I was in has a massive dirt backstop I built by hand. Took me 2 full weekends to shape it just right. Beyond that, there's nothing but woods stretching for hundreds of yards. That's how I do things. Thorough, safe, responsible. I've been coming out here every weekend for the past 3 months. Same trail, same methodical routine. Always cautious, always respectful of the land. I had everything prepped like I always did. Same path, same method, same care. What I didn't realize was that someone had been quietly watching me, tracking my habits without me even noticing. Apparently, being careful and lawful doesn't mean a thing to some people. I was in the middle of field dressing the deer when I suddenly heard a voice cutting through the trees like a siren. "What do you think you're doing?" The shout was sharp, angry, and getting louder by the second. I froze, confused, thinking maybe someone was lost or hurt, but then I saw her storming through the underbrush like a woman possessed. Her face was flushed red with fury, and she looked seconds away from losing it completely. Branches snagged in her neat blonde bob, but she didn't even seem to notice. She was on a mission, and I was apparently her target. We'd never officially met, though I recognized her car. I'd seen it pulling into a house a few doors down, always in a rush. Always with a tense look like the world owed her something. This was our first real encounter, and let's just say it wasn't exactly neighborly. Now that I thought about it, I had seen her car near the trail entrance a few times. I just assumed she was out for a walk or taking in the scenery. Turns out, she had other plans. The way she looked at me like I was some kind of criminal caught me off guard. There was a self-righteousness in her expression, the kind you only see in people who are dead certain they're right, even when the facts say otherwise. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that I wasn't doing anything wrong. I walked up to the fence separating our properties, trying to smooth things over. "Good morning," I said with a polite nod. "I'm Eric Johnson. I live just over there. I'm hunting on the preserve. With permits, everything's legal." I figured maybe she was just startled by the sound of gunfire. I thought once I explained things, she'd cool off, maybe even realize it was just a misunderstanding. Who knows? Maybe we'd even laugh about it later, but that's not how it went down. Her eyes narrowed like my words meant nothing. It was clear this wasn't about safety or noise. This was personal. "Legal, legal," she shrieked, her voice rising to an almost comical pitch. "You're putting every decent person in this neighborhood at risk. This isn't some wilderness here in a residential area." She was trembling now, hands shaking, voice breaking, practically foaming at the mouth. And I'll admit, I was stunned. I'd heard of people flipping out over noise complaints or property lines, but this was something else. This was a full-blown meltdown. Sure, gunfire can be jarring if you're not prepared for it, but her reaction, it was way out of proportion. She behaved like I'd just threatened her entire household. "I'm calling the police and the HOA," she snapped, already pulling out her phone like she'd rehearsed this scene before. "Let's see how legal." This is when they haul you off in cuffs. With that dramatic exit line, she spun around and stormed off, phone glued to her ear as she began dialing. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or be concerned. Was I being too sensitive in thinking she was completely overreacting? Or was this just the type of neighbor I had on my hands, the kind who called the cops over every little thing? Something told me this wasn't the end of it. And sure enough, about half an hour later, a police cruiser pulled into my driveway. Out stepped Officer Martinez, looking like he'd seen his share of neighborhood drama. wasn't thrilled to be adding another chapter to the collection. To his credit, though he handled everything calmly and professionally, I showed him my valid hunting license, the federal permits, and explained exactly where I'd been hunting within the legal boundaries of the preserve. I even pointed out the safety measures I'd set up, like the backstop barriers. Martinez nodded as we walked the area, jotting notes and asking sensible questions about my setup. "Sir, everything here looks compliant and safe," he said finally, scribbling a few last details into his notebook. "It might help to give your neighbors a heads up next time, just as a courtesy." Fair point. I probably could have avoided the drama if I'd just let folks know what was going on. Still, I appreciated his reasonable approach. Once he left, I stood watching his car disappear down the street, feeling a sense of relief that at least the law was on my side. But oddly enough, I wasn't mad. I was curious. There was something off about that woman's reaction. The immediate leap to threats and law enforcement felt too calculated, like she'd been waiting for an excuse. It wasn't just the sound of gunfire that had set her off. No, something else was driving her. Whoever she was, she hadn't just called the police. She'd declared war. And something told me that was only the beginning. Gunfire can be jarring, sure, but her reaction, that was something else entirely. You'd think I'd just threatened her entire family the way she flipped out. "I'm calling the police and the HOA," she shouted, already, yanking out her phone like it was muscle memory. "Let's see how legal this is once they drag you off." With that dramatic little performance, she spun around and stormed back toward her house. Phone pressed to her ear, already dialing. I just stood there for a second, unsure whether to laugh or worry. Was I the one overreacting for thinking she was acting insane, or was this just the kind of neighbor I had now? One of those people who called the cops over everything. Something told me this was just the beginning. Sure enough, about half an hour later, a police cruiser pulled into my driveway. Officer Martinez stepped out looking like he'd dealt with this kind of neighborhood mess more than once and probably had no illusions that it'd be the last. To his credit, though he handled it professionally. I showed him my hunting license, all the federal permits, and even pointed out the clear boundaries and the backstop I'd constructed. He gave it all a thorough look, took notes, and asked the kind of questions you'd expect from someone who actually knew what they were doing. "Your setup meets all the safety requirements," he finally said, jotting something in his notebook. "But next time, just a heads up to the neighbors might save you some trouble." Fair enough. I could admit that. Maybe I should have mentioned it beforehand. Been a bit more of a good neighbor. But overall, Martinez seemed satisfied that everything was in order. As his car rolled away, I actually felt pretty good about how it had gone down. At least the law wasn't crazy, even if my neighbor might be. But the more I thought about her behavior, the more something didn't sit right. It wasn't just the gunshots that set her off. Her reaction felt loaded. She didn't just act shocked, she went full courtroom prosecutor in 5 seconds flat. That wasn't normal. And I had a feeling this wasn't over Rebecca now. I had a name to go with. The angry woman behind the fence had made her opening move. She called the police without so much as trying to talk first. Now I was curious, was that it? Or was she just warming up? I kept staring at her house long after she disappeared inside. "Let's see how far you're willing to take this," I muttered to myself. A week passed with nothing. No yelling, no passive-aggressive lawn signs, not even a dirty look. I started thinking maybe she'd moved on to someone else. Maybe the visit from Officer Martinez had calmed her down. And then, I opened my mailbox. Inside was a thick envelope. Not your standard HOA newsletter. This thing was heavy, like it had someone's autobiography inside. The return address just read, Homeowners Association, in big, bold letters. I figured it was a landscaping update or some community event nobody would attend. But when I opened it, I froze. At the top, in massive red letters, were the words, "Violation notice and fine." And below that, a fine for $2,000. $2,000 for doing something completely legal. I blinked at the paper, thinking maybe I'd misread it. I hadn't. The letter claimed I'd violated community safety policies and noise regulations over 3 gunshots on my own property. The absurdity of it actually made me laugh. It was so over the top, I had to reread the page just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. And then I saw the signature. Rebecca Gray, HOA President. Of course. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. I could practically hear her smug voice repeating, "Legal consequences." Turns out she wasn't bluffing. She was coming for me with everything she had. According to the document, I was guilty of illegal hunting adjacent to community land and creating excessive noise disturbances. It gave me 7 days to pay or face further serious legal action. And something told me this was just the beginning. For someone to try to take legal action against me on my own property without so much as a single reasonable conversation, that was bold. Now I was genuinely curious, what's her next move going to be? Was that the end of her antics, or just the start of something bigger? I kept my eyes on Rebecca's house, the wheels turning in my mind. "Let's see how far you're willing to go with this, Rebecca," I muttered. As she disappeared inside. I got the gut feeling this was just the beginning. Rebecca didn't seem mad about a few rounds of target practice. No, this woman had a deeper agenda, and somehow, I had just become her primary target. I wasn't sure if this was going to spiral into a full-on legal war or end like some ridiculous neighborhood drama, but something inside me said I was about to find out it was going to be a lot messier than I'd imagined. A week passed without incident, no visits, no drama. I started thinking maybe Rebecca had moved on, found someone else to harass, or finally cooled off after the cops paid her a visit. It was almost too quiet. But then, I checked my mailbox. There it was, a thick envelope, heavier than usual. The return address simply read, Homeowners Association, printed in sharp, official-looking letters. I figured it was just the usual HOA nonsense, notices about upcoming meetings or a reminder to trim the hedges. The kind of stuff no one really reads but everyone pretends matters. But the second I opened it, my jaw dropped. A $2,000 fine for doing something completely legal on my own property. The letter screamed violation notice and fine in big, bold red print as if I'd committed a crime against humanity. And beneath it, the fine, $2,000 for violating community safety standards and noise regulations, $2,000 for firing 3 rounds during broad daylight. On land I own, I had to read it twice to be sure I wasn't imagining it. Was this real? Apparently. It was signed right at the bottom was the name, Rebecca Gray, the same woman who had been glaring at me from behind her fence. Turns out, she was the HOA president, and suddenly, everything clicked. Her threats about legal consequences. She meant them. She was trying to make me pay literally for every move I made. The document laid out how I had violated several so-called community codes, including illegal hunting activities and excessive noise on land adjacent to residential areas. It demanded payment within 7 days or else I'd be facing serious legal repercussions. I flipped the pages and found more nonsense claims that there were multiple violations documented over the past 60 days, complete with grainy photo evidence. Honestly, it read less like a fine and more like someone trying to run me out of town. I laughed out loud. Was this woman for real? But then, as I kept reading, the tone of the letter started bothering me. The language was too dramatic, the structure too clumsy, like someone had binged a few episodes of a courtroom drama and thought they were a real lawyer now. Something felt off. Instead of stewing in my irritation, I picked up my phone and dialed the HOA office. Time to see what kind of circus I was dealing with. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. A timid voice answered HOA office. The hesitation in her tone was immediate. She sounded like she was bracing to be yelled at. Hi, I said, keeping my tone calm but firm. This is Eric Johnson. I received a violation notice that seems odd. Can you tell me exactly which rule I broke? There was a pause, long enough for me to imagine her looking around, maybe checking to see if Rebecca was nearby. I just handle paperwork. Mr. Johnson, she finally said. Mrs. Gray is the one who deals with enforcement matters, she said. You have 7 days to pay, or face legal consequences. Her tone changed halfway through that sentence, like she was repeating someone else's words she didn't even believe I picked up on it right away. Consequences, I echoed. My voice was sharper now. What kind of consequences are we talking about? Before she could answer, I threw in another question, and just for the record, what HOA regulation exactly prohibits firearm use on private land? Silence. A thick, uncomfortable silence. Then she said, I'll have to check with Mrs. Gray and call you back. And the line went dead. I stared at my phone, letting it all sink in. This wasn't just about a fine anymore. I had just stepped into something a lot bigger and a lot more personal. That night, I went deep into research mode. I started pulling every legal document, every regulation I could find about HOA enforcement, private property rights, and firearm use. I had a feeling this was just the beginning and I wasn't going to let Rebecca Gray write the ending. I spent hours digging through legal resources, court precedents, HOA guidelines, and state enforcement procedures. What I found was nothing short of shocking. Rebecca had clearly crossed a line. Actually, according to the law, an HOA doesn't have the power to slap you with a hefty fine out of nowhere. There's a required process. First, a written notice outlining the violation. Then, a grace period to correct the issue. If nothing is resolved, the HOA can pursue a lien or take legal action. But jumping straight to a $2,000 demand with vague threats? That's not just improper, it's unlawful. I stared at the printed statutes in my hands. One phrase echoed in my head. Rebecca just broke the law. What made it worse? She had clearly been tracking my hunting activities for months, photos, timestamps, and location details. She wasn't just reacting. She'd been building a case against me like some amateur prosecutor. That's when I realized something. Rebecca had no idea what she was doing. She was playing a power game using rules she didn't even understand. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to give in. I wasn't paying that bogus fine. And from this moment forward, I was going to document everything. Every conversation, every notice, every call. I opened a digital folder on my laptop and labeled it, Rebecca Gray, Day 1. I started scanning all the paperwork I had. If she wanted a legal battle, then I was going to meet her in the courtroom, not on the fake legal battleground. she'd made up in her head, and something told me this wasn't the first time she'd pulled a stunt like this. Most people probably just rolled over and paid her fines to avoid the hassle, but I'm not most people. I stared at the growing stack of HOA paperwork beside my desk and whispered to myself, if it's war you want, Rebecca, then let's make it real. Even after I hung up the phone earlier, a strange tension had settled in my chest. If Rebecca was bold enough to send that outrageous fine without any legal grounds, what else was she doing behind the scenes? I had the unsettling feeling that I'd only scratched the surface and that this rabbit hole went far deeper than I imagined. In the days that followed, I basically became my own investigator. I filed requests for every HOA document they had on record, and I wasn't looking for just my name, I wanted everything. I asked for everything, every HOA document they had, no exceptions. Meeting transcripts, financial statements, complaint logs, email exchanges, anything that might give me leverage. When Amanda picked up my call, I explained that I was strongly considering taking legal action over the bogus fine, and in order to build my case, I'd need full access to all procedural records. She sounded uneasy, hesitating between her words, clearly caught off guard, but she had no legal grounds to deny me. No matter how uncomfortable it made her, she had to comply. Once I finally had the files in hand, I sat down and began combing through them line by line, and that's when everything took a hard left turn. The HOA regulations they had cited as the basis for my fine, they weren't in the official rulebook, they simply didn't exist. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a case of a rogue fine. I was staring down something much deeper, much darker. A long-running scheme hiding behind HOA policy. My first red flag came from the financial statements. I expected them to be dry, but they were downright chaotic. Line items listed as community upgrades didn't match up with the addresses listed. A $3,000 invoice for landscaping. The address listed was Rebecca's home. Fence repair marked as community property improvement. Again, her place. Shared road. Resurfacing. Yet again. The improvements only benefited Rebecca's private driveway. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. She was funneling HOA money straight into her own pocket. This wasn't about maintaining the neighborhood. It was about padding her own lifestyle. And she'd been doing it right under everyone's nose. The deeper I went, the worse it got. Security system upgrades, supposedly for the community, turned out to be for her private residence. Pool cleaning services billed to the HOA were actually for her own backyard oasis. Even a tree removal listed as necessary for safety. Yep, trees on her property alone. But the real shock came when I turned my attention to Rebecca herself. I decided to run a background check. What I found chilled me to the bone. She had a long, documented history of neighbor disputes, 3 separate lawsuits filed against her by residents in other neighborhoods she used to live in. All 3 ended the same way. Court defeats for Rebecca. The last one even resulted in a restraining order. I stared at the screen, speechless. This woman wasn't just a power-hungry HOA chair. She was a serial neighborhood bully with a legal track record to prove it. I shook my head and muttered under my breath. She's done this before, over and over again. She gave me access to everything: meeting minutes, financial documents, records of violations, even internal emails. I told Amanda I was thinking about taking legal action over the unjust fine, so I needed to examine every detail: rules, past rulings, procedures. She looked nervous, stumbling over her words during our calls, but she was legally obligated to give me the files. I could tell she didn't like it, but she had no way to say no. And when I finally went through the files, what I found left me stunned. I began reviewing the HOA's bylaws, but something felt off. The specific rules they used to fine me weren't listed anywhere in the official documentation. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about a bogus fine. It was something far more serious, a pattern, a deep-rooted system of corruption that had been happening for years. The first thing that really raised red flags were the financial reports. They were a total disaster. There were expenses marked for community improvements, but the addresses attached didn't match common areas at all. For example, a $3,000 landscaping bill supposedly for public property, but it listed Rebecca's personal address. Another $2,000 for fencing on community land? Same thing, Rebecca's place. Roadwork listed as shared access maintenance. That $1,500 went straight to improving her private driveway. I let out a low whistle, flipping through the paperwork. She was using HOA money like her own personal fund. This wasn't just misuse of power, it was straight-up theft, and it had been going on for years. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Pool maintenance charges actually paid for work on her backyard pool. Tree removal fees. Her yard? Again? Even community security upgrades turned out to be the installation of her personal home security system, but that was just the beginning. I decided to look deeper into Rebecca Gray's background, and what I found chilled me. Court documents showed she'd been sued 3 separate times for harassment in other neighborhoods. 3 communities, 3 sets of neighbors who'd had enough and dragged her into court. She lost all 3 cases. The last one even ended with a restraining order. I stared at the paperwork. A repeat neighborhood tyrant, I muttered. This was her playbook move in? Hijack the HOA and bully everyone until they give up or leave. But this time, she hadn't counted on someone digging deep enough to uncover it all. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered, and it was Amanda from the HOA, but she wasn't at the office, and her voice was shaking. Mr. Johnson, she began, her words trembling, I'm calling from my personal phone. I can't stay quiet anymore. Mrs. Gray has been making me forge documents, meeting minutes, board signatures, violation notices against innocent homeowners. I have proof, and I just can't do this anymore. My pulse kicked up. This was exactly the kind of evidence I needed, but Amanda was clearly putting herself in danger by coming forward. If Rebecca was as ruthless as she seemed, Amanda could suffer serious consequences. Can we meet in private? Amanda asked. She has a whole file on you, photos of your truck at the trailhead, you walking into the forest, even notes about your hunting trips. She's been planning this for while we met at a quiet coffee shop, about 20 minutes away from our neighborhood, the kind of place where no one would think twice about us being there. Amanda looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. She kept glancing behind her and over her shoulder, clearly paranoid that Rebecca might show up. Her hands shook as she ordered her coffee, and she checked her phone constantly like she expected some kind of threat. Then she handed me a flash drive. It had everything. I mean everything. Fake meeting minutes from board meetings that never happened. Falsified signatures on documents that weren't ever voted on. Emails where Rebecca threatened residents with bogus fines and lawsuits, and then the surveillance files folder after folder of time-stamped photos of me entering the forest preserve. She had been watching me for months, documenting every move I made. She made me create all of it, Amanda admitted, her hands trembling. Every violation letter, every fine, every decision, it's all fake. She's been running this scam for 2 years. She had a pattern. Move into a neighborhood, grab control of the HOA if one existed, and then rule with an iron fist, pushing residents to the brink until they either packed up and left or took the rare step of hiring lawyers. But clearly, she had never come up against someone ready to peel back every layer of her history. Most folks just tolerated her antics or quietly relocated rather than go to battle. This situation was much deeper than I'd imagined. Just then, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. Amanda, I said cautiously. Her voice on the other end was barely steady, shaky, like a candle in a windstorm. Mr. Johnson, she whispered. I'm calling you from my personal phone. I can't stay quiet anymore. There was fear in every word. Mrs. Gray's been making me falsify meeting records, forge board member signatures, and send violation letters to innocent residents. I've kept evidence, and I just can't do it anymore. My pulse spiked. This was the exact break I'd been waiting for, but I also knew Amanda was putting herself in serious danger. If Rebecca was half as ruthless as she appeared, Amanda was risking everything by coming forward. Can we talk somewhere private? She asked, her voice dropping even lower. She has a file on you, Eric. Photos of you near the nature preserve, your truck parked at the trail, your hunting patterns. She's been building a case for months. We met later that day at a nondescript coffee shop about 20 minutes away, one of those places where no one notices you. Amanda looked exhausted, her eyes darting to every corner, like Rebecca might walk in at any second. Her hands trembled as she held her coffee, and she kept checking her phone as though waiting for something terrifying to appear. She handed me a flash drive. This has everything, she said, barely above a whisper. Inside were documents proving what I feared, forged meeting notes from gatherings that never occurred, fake signatures on HOA forms that were never approved, and emails where Rebecca threatened residents with penalties for violations that didn't even exist. And then, photo folders. Dozens of surveillance pictures of me entering the woods, all time-stamped and meticulously organized. She had been tailing my hunting habits for over a year. She made me build an entire fake trail of violations, Amanda admitted, barely holding it together. Every fine, every board ruling, every fake vote over the last 2 years, it's all fabricated. To escalate things even further and, not in a way I could have predicted, she began posting on the neighborhood app, Next Block, claiming I was a dangerous man with a history of violence, that I was armed and unstable. According to her, she even attached photos taken without my consent of me holding hunting gear, deliberately framed to make me look threatening. It was clearly an attempt to smear me, to turn the community against me. But the funny thing about pushing people too far, they start to push back. A few neighbors I'd barely spoken to reached out privately, saying they'd seen through her lies. One even forwarded me screenshots from the HOA group chat where Rebecca was openly instructing board members to make an example out of me, when I knew I wasn't just dealing with petty harassment anymore. This had become a coordinated campaign to destroy my reputation. But I wasn't alone and I wasn't powerless. I compiled every image, every message, every detail she had broadcasted about me, and my lawyer helped me file a formal complaint not just for harassment, but for defamation, stalking, and unlawful surveillance. The moment those papers were served to her front door, everything shifted. Rebecca stopped driving by. The posts vanished. But I wasn't satisfied with silence. I wanted change. I partnered with that ex-HOA board member to start a petition calling for Rebecca's removal, and this time, people listened. What began as a single unjust fine turned into a community-wide reckoning. Within weeks, we gathered enough support to force an emergency HOA vote, and in front of a packed room filled with angry residents and teary testimonies, Rebecca Gray was officially removed from power. Her reign of control and intimidation was finally over. As I stood outside that meeting hall, watching families laugh again and neighbors greet each other like human beings, I finally felt peace, not just for myself but for everyone who'd been too afraid to speak up. And if Rebecca ever tries something like this again, she'll learn the hard way some of us fight back. And we don't stop until the truth wins. She didn't just keep watching, she started stalking me, plain and simple. The slow drive-bys that I once brushed off as coincidences were now happening multiple times a day. There was no more pretending. She wasn't being subtle anymore. I'd catch her creeping past, sometimes stopping completely, peering out of her car like she expected to catch me doing something illegal. At first I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, but the truth stared back at me from her eyes every time she passed. She was watching me deliberately, aggressively. This wasn't just annoying, it was invasive. I couldn't step outside without feeling her eyes on me. Whether I was watering plants or taking out the trash, she was always there, lurking in her car like a sentry. Then, things took a dark turn. One day, she parked, stepped out, and raised a camera. Not a phone, not a small device, but a full-on DSLR with a giant lens. She snapped photo after photo as if documenting a crime scene. The clicking rang out in the quiet like distant gunfire. She was building a case, or at least trying to fabricate one. No matter what I did, pull weeds, hose down the driveway, or fix the gate, there she was, capturing everything through that lens. She stayed just outside my property line, her presence looming like a shadow. It got to the point where I planned my day around her stalking sessions, but I knew this wasn't just about pictures. Then one morning, after a heavy storm, I noticed muddy tracks across my yard. They were oddly shaped high heels, totally inappropriate for my rocky, uneven backyard. That's when it hit me. She'd trespassed. She'd actually walked around my entire property, checking out my gear, even peeking into my garage windows. She'd gone way past the line. I grabbed my phone, started recording, and for the first time, called the police. Enough was enough. I didn't stop there. I rang up a lawyer, and then I contacted someone who used to be in the HOA, someone who also had issues with Rebecca's controlling ways. I wasn't going to sit back anymore. The tables were about to turn. Rebecca didn't back down. She doubled down. Within days, I was bombarded by city officials. Inspectors from every department started showing up unannounced. First, it was code enforcement, responding to an anonymous complaint about my overgrown lawn. One look, and the inspector chuckled, it was manicured to perfection. Then came zoning, claiming my truck was obstructing public access. Despite it being clearly parked in my driveway, the nonsense didn't stop. A business license inspector arrived, saying someone reported I was running an illegal enterprise out of my home. I wasn't selling so much as a lemonade. Every official who showed up said the same thing. The reports were baseless, but they were obligated to follow up. Rebecca was weaponizing city services to harass me through bureaucratic warfare. That's when I called Amanda. She wasn't just helpful, she was ready. She sent over a folder of damning documents she'd collected, fake accusations, internal emails from the HOA, and everything in between. Amanda wasn't just a source anymore, she had become my ally in this war. But Rebecca wasn't finished yet. One day, Officer Martinez knocked on my door again. His expression said it all. He was tired of this too. Mr. Johnson, he sighed, Mrs. Gray claims you threatened her life. I stood there, dumbfounded, power washer still in hand. Threats. I haven't spoken a single word to that woman since the day she confronted me. I pointed down the street. She's literally been sitting in her car, photographing me for 2 hours. Martinez followed my gaze, and sure enough, there she was, lurking as usual. What would you do in my shoes? Keep enduring it, or push back? Because I was way past fed up. After Martinez left, he'd barely turned the corner before Rebecca approached the fence again. But this time, something was different. Her posture, her eyes. She looked smug, like she knew something I didn't, like she thought she'd already won. I walked up to her, no longer amused, no longer trying to stay neutral. The energy shifted. I could feel it. Cold, calculated, controlled. Rebecca, I said, my voice low and firm, locking eyes with her. You're digging your own grave, and it's deeper than you think. For the first time since all this chaos began, I saw something real flicker in Rebecca's eyes, fear, but she masked it quickly with her usual sneer. You think your little phone scares me? She snapped, stepping back. Then, she turned on her heel, throwing a final parting shot over her shoulder. I'm not done with you, Eric. I didn't flinch. I could feel something shift inside me, something solid and determined. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore, this was war. And I was done playing defense. Just as I picked up the phone to call my attorney, the doorbell rang. I opened it to see Rebecca standing smugly on my porch, holding a court summons like it was a trophy. See you in court, she said, and turned away without another word. But what she didn't know was I was already steps ahead. Within the hour, I was at the courthouse, filing a countersuit. The next morning, I got in touch with a lawyer named William Parker, an expert in HOA disputes. I laid it all out for him. The harassment, the inspections, the false complaints, Amanda's files, everything. He took it seriously. For over 2 hours, William reviewed every document, sometimes shaking his head, sometimes just sitting in disbelief. Then he looked up and said, "Eric, this goes far beyond civil issues. We're talking criminal charges and harassment, forgery, even trespassing. This woman is deep in it. Could this actually mean jail time?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "If we can lock this down with airtight proof, yes," William replied, calmly organizing the evidence. "But we need it to be absolutely irrefutable in court." I nodded, already turning over ideas in my head. "I know exactly how to get what we need," I told him, "but when the time comes, you'll need to be ready to strike." He agreed. The rest of our meeting was spent outlining the legal plan. That afternoon, I made a trip to a specialty surveillance store and bought professional-grade camera stop-tier equipment with 4K clarity, audio capture, and automatic timestamps. I was almost finished setting it all up when I noticed something movement, a shadow just at the edge of my backyard. It was her, Rebecca. From the moment this whole ordeal began, I finally saw something real flash across Rebecca's face. Fear, her eyes locked onto mine, filled with hatred, but for the first time, they also revealed a hint of unease. "You think that little phone scares me?" she scoffed, stepping back with a sneer. But just before turning to leave, she threw a warning over her shoulder. "This isn't over, Eric." I didn't need her to say it, I could feel it. This wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I was just pulling out my phone to call my attorney when the doorbell rang. And there she was again, Rebecca smirking like she already won, holding out a court summons. This wasn't petty anymore. This was war. Without wasting a breath, I drove straight to the courthouse to file a countersuit. The following morning, I got in touch with William Parker, a lawyer known for taking down corrupt HOAs. I laid out everything, every incident, every detail, and the evidence Amanda had handed over on that flash drive. He spent the next 2 hours examining it all, shaking his head in disbelief, letting out the occasional low whistle. Finally, he looked up, visibly stunned. "Eric," he said slowly, "she's not just violating HOA policies. This is criminal. Embezzlement, harassment, forged documents, trespassing, ... This woman's crossed multiple legal lines." "So we're talking jail time?" I asked. Though I already knew the answer, William nodded. "Yes, but to make it stick, we need evidence. She can't explain away. Solid, airtight proof." I leaned back, already hatching a plan in my head. "I know exactly how to get it, but I'll need you ready to strike when I give the signal." He agreed. We spent the rest of the meeting mapping out a complete legal assault. That afternoon, I went out and bought top-tier surveillance gear, hidden 4K cameras, with audio, timestamp logging, the works. I set them up carefully across my property, concealed, but covering every fence line and entry. I even set a little trap, a bait zone near the back fence, some of my old hunting equipment, placed just right so that if Rebecca came nosing around, she'd find it, and I'd catch her in the act. I knew she couldn't resist trying to control me, and that was going to be her downfall. Late that night, Amanda called again. Her tone was sharp. "Eric, I found something that could destroy her. This is big." She wasn't just helping anymore. Amanda had become a vital part of the fight. 2 days later, she called again, this time, her voice low, almost whispering. "Rebecca's planning something. Eric, she's been talking about giving you your final lesson. She's filing a new suit, claims she's owed $10,000 in emotional damages. And she keeps mentioning months of evidence she's gathered to prove you're hunting illegally. She thinks she has an ironclad case." Amanda hesitated, her voice trembling. "She keeps saying she's going to eliminate the problem permanently, that she'll drive you out of the neighborhood by any means necessary." That phrase hit hard. Permanently. What exactly was she planning, and how far was she willing to go? That's when I reached into my wallet and pulled out something I'd kept hidden this entire time, a federal badge and ID. I stared at it for a moment, then muttered under my breath, "Rebecca, you have no idea what by any means necessary really means, but you're about to learn." That night, I ran final checks on my entire surveillance setup. I reviewed every clip, every document, making sure not a single detail was out of place. Because I wasn't just building a case, I was setting the stage for Rebecca's total takedown, and when it happened, it would be precise, legal, and devastating. What was she planning to do next? Amanda's warning had painted a grim picture, and I knew whatever Rebecca had in mind wouldn't be pretty. I settled onto my deck that night with every security feed lighting up my laptop screen. Gone was the relaxed calm I usually felt. At dusk, in its place was a predator's patience, waiting for its prey to slip up. The era of neighborly politeness was over. Rebecca thought she'd broken me with fines and false reports. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. Just as I finished adjusting the final camera angle, my phone vibrated. It was Amanda. "She's coming at dawn. Be ready." My heart raced. She added a detail that made my skin crawl. I saw her loading bolt cutters and a hammer into her trunk. I couldn't help but smirk. I double-checked every piece of evidence one last time and called my lawyer. It was time to end this. 5 o'clock came sooner than I liked, but I was already wide awake, eyes glued to the kitchen window. In crawled Rebecca's car, headlights off, inching up my driveway like she was on a covert mission. Clad in all black, she moved with exaggerated stealth, funny if it weren't so absurd. In one hand she clutched bolt cutters. In the other, a hammer. Tucked under her arm was a massive wooden sign. It looked like suburban warfare gear. She skirted the side of the house and slipped into the backyard. I hit record on every camera. The next minutes were a masterclass in calculated destruction. Snap, snap, snap. She methodically sliced through the fence wire, each cut captured in crisp 4K with time-stamped audio. It was almost ritualistic, as if she believed she was freeing some captive colony. When she finished with about 20 feet of fencing, she planted her sign into the lawn like a grotesque monument. In bold letters it declared, "No hunting zone violators will be." But before she could hammer the final stake, the sound of sirens pierced the morning air. I watched as flashing lights swept across the yard and 2 squad cars pulled up. My lawyer, William Parker, was already on site with a restraining order in hand, and behind him walked Amanda, standing tall despite the dirt smudges on her blouse. Rebecca froze, bolt cutters halfway raised, hammer poised mid-strike. Her jaw dropped as Officer Martinez read her rights. The look on her face told the real story. She had underestimated me, and now her plan was collapsing in real time. As they led her away in handcuffs, I stood in my lawn, cameras rolling, and evidence solid. This was the day the hunter became the hunted, and justice finally took its shot. The sign she hammered into my lawn blared in bold red letters. Nitrogen monoxide hunting zone violators will be prosecuted by the HOA. You could probably spot it from a satellite. Rebecca had just claimed my property as HOA territory, not just absurd, but entirely illegal. Her nerve was astounding, but also exactly what I needed to tip things in my favor. But then came the twist that really put everything over the top. After spending nearly 20 minutes tearing apart my fence and violating multiple state laws, Rebecca had the gall to pull out her phone and dial 911. "This is an emergency," she said in this exaggerated, theatrical voice, like she was witnessing a terrorist attack or a chemical spill. "Eric Johnson is breaking HOA hunting regulations," she declared. "We need immediate police intervention." I stood behind my curtains, watching her stand atop the wreckage she had created, trying to have me arrested on charges she made up 5 minutes ago. It was so outrageous, it would have been funny if it wasn't so criminal. Just before sunrise, Amanda called me. Her voice was sharp. "I've got it. The HOA has been moving funds into a private account. Rebecca's. It's not just about the fine anymore. This is financial fraud. A full-blown embezzlement case." 15 minutes later, Officer Martinez rolled into my driveway. Even from a distance, I could see the fatigue in his eyes. The man looked like he was deeply questioning every career choice that had led him to this moment. I was sitting calmly on my front porch, coffee in hand, reading a paperback novel like it was just another peaceful morning. Meanwhile, Rebecca was flailing around my backyard like a reality show contestant having a meltdown. She was pointing wildly at her unauthorized sign, as if it were some kind of nuclear launch code. "Mrs. Gray," Martinez called out wearily, walking toward the chaos with the sigh of a man who'd seen too much nonsense for one morning, "can you please explain the emergency here?" He took in the scene. A demolished fence, a massive illegal sign, and me, the supposed criminal, sipping coffee without a care in the world. The mental math wasn't adding up. "He's violating the HOA's hunting rules," Rebecca shrieked, jabbing her finger in my direction like I was holding a loaded weapon. Her voice was pitched so high it almost cracked glass. "That sign proves he's in the wrong," she cried, breathless. Martinez looked from her to the sign, to me, then back at her. His face said everything. Confusion, disbelief, concern, like he was wondering if she'd finally snapped completely. "Ma'am," he said slowly, deliberately, "he's reading a book." "What violation are you even reporting, officer?" Martinez asked, his tone edged with disbelief. That was my moment. I stood up slowly, composed and steady. "Things are a bit different today, Officer Martinez," I said with quiet confidence. "This time, I've got proof. Solid evidence that reveals who's actually breaking the law here." The moment those words left my mouth, Rebecca's face lost all color. For the first time, I saw real panic flash in her eyes. The power dynamic had shifted. I wasn't on the defensive anymore. I was coming for the truth, and I wasn't going to stop until every lie she built came crashing down. I invited Officer Martinez inside and pulled up my home security system on my computer. The footage loaded clearly, time-stamped, and in full HD. It showed Rebecca trespassing, cutting through my fence, stomping through my yard, and hammering that absurd sign into the ground all just minutes before her bogus 911 call. Martinez watched the video, then glanced out the window, where Rebecca still stood beside her evidence. His face shifted, first confusion, then realization, and finally a kind of disappointed exhaustion. When we stepped outside, his voice was stern. "Ma'am," he said, I'd like you to explain what we just saw in that footage. Rebecca came storming over, demanding answers. But when I hit play again, this time with her watching, her confidence collapsed. The screen didn't lie. She was caught red-handed, and she knew it. That's fake, she screeched, though her voice trembled with fear. He tampered with that video. Martinez didn't even flinch. Ma'am, he said evenly, this footage is timestamped, taken from multiple angles, and stored in a cloud system. It clearly shows you vandalizing private property, but I wasn't stopping there. Before we move ahead with the vandalism charges, I said, there's something else you need to know, something bigger. I asked if we could speak privately, and Martinez followed me into the living room, while Rebecca paced outside, peering through the glass like a caged animal, sensing a trap. What I revealed next turned everything upside down. I laid out the financial evidence Amanda had, uncovered proof of embezzlement, a slush fund, and years of HOA corruption. Martinez didn't say much. He didn't have to. His expression said it all: shock, then resolve. The game had changed. As I picked up my phone to call Amanda back, the doorbell rang. I opened it and found a line of officers at my front door led, unbelievably, by Rebecca. What exact violation are you referring to? I asked, standing tall with my usual calm presence. Today's a different story, Officer Martinez, I said evenly, because I have solid proof evidence that reveals who the real criminal is in all of this. Rebecca's face lost all color the moment she heard that. For the first time, I saw fear, real, raw fear, flicker across her expression. This wasn't about defending myself anymore. This was now a full-scale counterattack. I wasn't just pushing back against a bogus complaint. I was ready to unravel her entire facade. I invited Martinez inside, walked over to my desk, and pulled up the security footage on my computer. The video left nothing to the imagination. Rebecca trespassing, sawing through my fence, then hammering her little HOA sign right into my front yard, every second timestamped. Just minutes before she called 911. Martinez leaned closer, watching the footage intently. He glanced out the window where Rebecca still stood like nothing had happened, right beside the sign she planted. I watched his expression evolve, first confusion, then realization, and finally a look that resembled quiet professional disappointment. When we stepped back outside, Martinez turned to her. Ma'am, he said in a tone that was suddenly all business. Can you explain what's shown in this footage? Rebecca charged toward us indignant. What footage? She barked. So I replayed it right there on my phone, showing her every second of her own criminal activity in high resolution. She stared, stunned. Then she shrieked, that's fake. He edited that. It's not real. But her voice was trembling now. Martinez stood firm. Ma'am, this is security footage from multiple angles with matching timestamps. It clearly shows you damaging Mr. Johnson's property, and I wasn't done. Officer, before we start talking about vandalism charges, I said calmly, there's something even more serious you need to see. Something that turns this into more than just a neighbor dispute. I asked if we could talk privately. We stepped inside while Rebecca pressed her face against the window, eyes darting nervously. In the next few minutes, I told Martinez what I'd been holding back, information that changed everything. His face grew increasingly serious as he processed the gravity of what I was revealing. Then, just as I was about to call Amanda to update her, the doorbell rang again. I opened the door to find multiple officers standing there, led by none other than Rebecca herself. We have a warrant for your arrest, she said with icy confidence. For obstruction of justice, she thought she was winning. But something in the air had shifted, and even Rebecca seemed to sense it. She began backing away toward her car, as if preparing to flee. Mrs. Gray, Martinez said, his voice now fully official. There's something you need to understand. The man you've been harassing is not who you think. I took a slow step forward. This was it. Time to lift the veil. Rebecca still wore that smug expression, certain she was about to enjoy her victory. That grin faltered the moment I reached into my back pocket. You just made a very big mistake, I said softly, pulling out my wallet. Her eyes followed my hand, and when I flipped open the badge, her entire face changed. I walked calmly back inside and returned with my official ID, weathered, real, and, holding it out to Martinez, I let the authority in my voice take over. I'm Eric Johnson, Federal Wildlife Officer with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Everything I've done on this land, including the hunting, falls within my federal jurisdiction. This property borders a protected reserve, and I've been conducting official monitoring operations. Martinez blinked, realization crashing down hard. Outside, Rebecca's face was pressed to the glass, straining to hear what was going on. She had no clue her game was over. She thought I was just a regular guy, someone she could bully. She had no idea I was a federal agent. When Martinez saw my credentials, he immediately straightened. Officer Johnson, he said with sudden respect. I had no idea. His tone changed completely, but through the glass, I could see Rebecca still trying to figure out why Martinez was now addressing me like a superior. Then she caught two words, federal officer. Her smirk vanished. She took a step back, stumbled, then collapsed into a patio chair, pale as a ghost. You're lying, she whispered. But even she didn't believe it. I didn't have to say a word. Her entire reality had just shattered. This wasn't some random dispute with a guy next door. She had just committed multiple crimes against a federal law enforcement officer, and the fallout was just beginning. A chill settled over her voice. "You're under arrest," she said icily, "for obstructing justice." This was no longer just about a finite, it was personal now. It was war. When we stepped back outside, Rebecca's instincts must have kicked in because she was slowly backing toward her car like she was ready to flee. "Mrs. Gray," Officer Martinez said, his tone suddenly all business. "You, clearly, have no idea who you've been harassing." And for a moment, I debated whether it was time to reveal everything because Rebecca Gray was about to learn the hard way that she hadn't just picked a fight with some ordinary guy. She'd challenged someone with serious federal backing. Rebecca smirked, still clinging to her confidence. But that smug look began to fade when I slowly pulled out my wallet. "You've just made a huge mistake," I told her calmly. I opened the weathered leather and revealed my federal badge. All the color drained from her face as I handed Martinez my credentials. I watched his expression shift from confusion to stunned realization. My stance straightened, and I dropped the friendly persona. "I'm Eric Johnson," I said firmly, my voice slipping into the authoritative tone I use on duty. "Federal wildlife officer with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. My activities on this land aren't just recreational, they're tied to my job, monitoring the federal wildlife preserve that borders my property." Martinez's eyes went wide as the gravity of my words hit him. Outside, Rebecca leaned forward, trying desperately to catch pieces of the conversation, but she had no idea her world was crumbling. She thought. I was just a stubborn local who'd eventually cave. She was about to find out how wrong she'd been. The moment Martinez saw my federal ID, he snapped to attention. "Yes, sir. Officer Johnson," he said respectfully. I had no idea his voice now held genuine deference. Through the window, I could see Rebecca's eyes darting as she tried to understand why everything had shifted so dramatically, but then she caught it. "Federal wildlife officer." Her smile collapsed. She staggered back, almost tripping, eyes wide with panic. "You're lying," she muttered, her voice trembling. But the fear betrayed her. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed into a patio chair. Her face had gone completely pale. She had just realized she hadn't been messing with a neighbor, she'd been targeting a federal law enforcement officer, and the crimes she committed were no longer HOA-level infractions. They were serious federal offenses. "Let me continue with the next part in the same tone and structure. Rewriting your next submitted paragraph," I turned to Martinez, laying it all out clearly. "This isn't just some petty neighbor dispute. Mrs. Gray has been interfering with a federal officer during the execution of his duties. She's committed vandalism on land adjacent to federal property and submitted false police reports against me, a federal officer. These are criminal offenses, not civil complaints." Right then, my attorney, William Parker, arrived, a leather briefcase in hand. "Additionally," William said, setting down files on the table and spreading out documents, "we've uncovered financial fraud." He laid out the evidence. Over $7,000 embezzled from the HOA's account, forged legal documents, and a documented pattern of harassment in her previous neighborhoods. The pile of evidence against her was overwhelming. It finally hit Rebecca. It wasn't just some clash over yard rules. She had launched a full-scale illegal campaign against someone protected by federal authority. The same woman who strutted through the neighborhood like a self-declared queen was now looking at criminal prosecution. "This can't be happening," she whispered, her voice faint and broken. "I'm the HOA president. I enforce the rules." But even she didn't believe that anymore. Her words were empty, desperate, like she was clinging to a title that no longer held weight. She was unraveling right in front of us, and I didn't let her off the hook. "You're not in control anymore," I said coldly. "You broke the law, and now you're going to be held accountable." The air crackled with tension, and from the look on her face, I knew she finally realized it was over. "Ma'am," Martinez said with finality, "you are under arrest for harassment, vandalism, filing false police reports, and obstruction of a federal officer." The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut around her wrists was pure satisfaction, and the fallout came fast. Within a day, her arrest triggered a tidal wave of consequences. The HOA called an emergency board meeting. The few legitimate members wasted no time, voted unanimously to remove her as president. Federal charges were formally filed. The HOA demanded immediate repayment of the embezzled funds. I filed a civil suit for $15,000 in damages related to harassment and destruction of property. And to top it all off, the court issued a 5-year restraining order, legally barring her from coming near me or my home. The woman who believed she could scare anyone into submission was about to come face to face with the full might of the federal government. "Detective Martinez," I said firmly, "this isn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. Mrs. Gray hasn't just been pestering some random civilian. She's been actively interfering with the federal agents' work, damaging land adjacent to protected federal property, and filing fraudulent police reports. These are no longer civil issues, they're federal offenses." Right then, my lawyer, William Parker, arrived, briefcase in hand. Without a word, he opened it and began laying out documents. "There's more," William added, spreading a stack of files across the table. She siphoned over $7,000 from the HOA's funds, forged official papers, and has a documented pattern of harassment in multiple former neighborhoods. The pile of evidence was damning. Rebecca's face went pale as the reality set in. This wasn't a scuffle with a local she could intimidate, it was a full-blown criminal case against a federal agent. The weight of her actions had finally caught up to her. Her voice trembled. This can't be happening. I'm the HOA president. I make the rules. But even she could hear how meaningless that sounded now. Her authority had vanished, and all that remained was desperation. I didn't let her spiral. You're not in charge anymore. You've been breaking laws, and now it's time to face the consequences. The tension was thick in the air. I could see it in her eyes. She knew it was over. Ma'am, Martinez declared sharply, you're under arrest for vandalism, harassment, filing false police reports, and interfering with a federal officer. The sound of the handcuffs snapping shut was one of the most satisfying things I'd ever heard. What followed was a chain reaction that shattered Rebecca's carefully constructed world in under 24 hours. An emergency HOA meeting was held, and the legitimate board members voted unanimously to strip her of her presidency. Federal charges were officially filed. The HOA demanded immediate repayment of the embezzled $7,000. I personally filed a civil lawsuit seeking $15,000 for harassment and property damage. A judge issued a 5-year restraining order to keep her away from my home. Then, more victims stepped forward. Residents from her previous neighborhoods came out with stories of similar abuse. The FBI launched an investigation into her misuse of HOA funds and forged documents. Her entire life unraveled. But real justice came. Not just in her downfall, but in the transformation that followed. After Rebecca's grip on the neighborhood ended, Amanda was named interim HOA president and immediately undid all of Rebecca's illegal and abusive policies. For the first time in years, people began sharing what they'd endured. Neighbors recalled how she'd fined families for kids' chalk drawings, forced the removal of American flags for being unsophisticated, and even threatened elderly homeowners over minor yard issues. Meanwhile, she used HOA money to upgrade her own home, claiming it was for the community. This neighborhood had lived under her rule like prisoners, but now, they were free. Smiles returned. Children played outside again. Gardens were tended without fear of fines. Patriotic banners fluttered proudly on porches. The fear was gone. A week later, life had returned to normal. I sat on my porch, sipping fresh orange juice, watching deer graze peacefully in my yard. No angry voices at the fence, no visits from the police, no hidden cameras pointed at my home. Then a message lit up my phone. It was from Amanda. Thank you for freeing us from her rule. The neighborhood is celebrating. We're organizing a community BBQ. You're the guest of honor. I couldn't help but smile. I glanced at my security camera setup and raised my glass toward it. Never underestimate the quiet neighbor, I said. Sometimes, the calmest ones are the last people you should try to push. Rebecca Gray thought she could bully anyone, but she never once stopped to ask who she was actually messing with. I lifted my orange juice in a mock toast to federal justice and to Karen's learning about consequences. Sometimes, bullies only understand authority when it shows up with a badge and the full force of the United States government behind it. As the sun crept over the horizon, a warm wave of peace washed over me. Rebecca, once the self-declared queen of the HOA, was now in federal custody, awaiting trial. Her reign was officially over. The same mailbox that once delivered threats now brought thank you cards. The fence she destroyed had been rebuilt stronger than ever, and the HOA, under Amanda's honest leadership, finally operated transparently. Rebecca Gray was now just another name in a court docket, facing felony charges that would follow her for life. I took one last sip of my orange juice, smiling as I watched the deer roam peacefully. Justice, when it comes, doesn't just restore peace, it reminds us why we fight. Thanks for sticking with me through this journey. Have you ever dealt with a Karen like this? Drop a comment. I'd love to hear your story. And if this tale hit home, don't forget to tap the thanks button and support the channel. Until next time, this is Timeless Walks, where neighbors clash, secrets spill, and karma never forgets. Stick around. We've got receipts.